And we're live. Greg Meenahan, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, nice to be here.
I'm really excited about this because you have only been in the coffee industry for 2 years.
Yeah,
And we had a really interesting conversation the other day. You work for World Coffee Research.
that's correct. Yes.
So I came looking for you to have this conversation. I found you on LinkedIn and wanted to have a conversation after having a look at your website and realizing there's some really interesting work going on here that actually is filled with substance. It's not just someone trying to do some work and hope that someone else catches on. First of all, I want to thank you guys for what you're doing. I think it's fantastic. It's very interesting. It piques my interest both as previously a genetic scientist and someone who's now currently in the coffee industry and has been for 15 years. What you're doing is really addressing a lot of the future concerns and the current concerns that our industry is experiencing.
Yeah, no question.
So would you mind by starting by telling us what World Coffee Research does?
Yes. World Coffee Research is many people are familiar with a 501c3, which is a nonprofit designation, and World Coffee Research is a 501c5. And what that means is it's a special IRS designation for agricultural research and development entities. And that is what we are. We are doing research on agriculture, very specifically on coffee.
How did it all start? Who makes the decision of we need to do this and we're going to own it, so let's make it happen?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. And I'll tell you, I have met a lot of people who have told me how they started World Coffee Research. So.
Oh, really?
Yes.
So more than one person's claiming that they're the founder of World Coffee Research. Fantastic.
Yes.
We're a coffee industry of them.
And I think that's indicative of really how it started. I think it started with a lot of conversations, and so there were a lot of people who were involved in these initial conversations about the gaps in research and development around coffee. What are the main constraints in the coffee, sustainability right now, and what role does ag R&D play in those constraints? And so really, when I take a look back to the sort of the genesis of WCR, I think if I had to say how or why did WCR come online when it did, and it came online officially in 2012. So there was a lot of meetings in 2011, and there were discussions in 2010, I think, right, to get this whole thing going. And I think what you have is what I see in the industry. And again, you're right. I've been in the coffee industry for only 2 years, so I'm really a coffee newbie in many ways. And what I saw is that, in the early 2000s, this idea of going to origin, right, was really beginning to take off with roasters and some different sustainability concepts like purchasing direct and sustainable harvest and their relationship coffee, and these ways of trying to support the economic sustainability of growers. So once you travel to origin and you actually meet your producers and you go to these communities, there's sort of a human thing, a human need to help, especially when you see, third world living conditions and these communities and people are struggling or they're being very scrappy. You're buying coffee from them and you want them to be successful. You want them to be successful because you want them there next year when you buy coffee. You want, maybe if you like what they're doing already, you want more of it next year. But really, you begin to want to see that particular producer to thrive, not just survive, not just kind of eke out something on the margins, but actually survive. And so roasters then had to ask, okay, how can I help you, producer? How can I help you? Period. And so here you have a roaster who is very skilled in roasting profiles, in blending, in flavor profiles, in cupping, in quality, in marketing, in packaging. Suddenly, that roaster who has zero experience in agriculture is trying to help a farmer.
Wow.
Right?
Wow. I mean, and agronomists weren't a thing in our industry then, were they?
No, exactly. So I think what happened then is that
Sorry to cut you off there. It just so lends itself to that whole colonialism bullshit, doesn't it?
Well, you know, that's a whole other conversation, and I can't claim any real expertise about that, except as it's in conjunction with how coffee spread around the world, you know, which was by and large initially colonialism and missionaries bringing these beans around to various places. But I think there's a real disconnect between the consumption side and the production side that can only be sustained when crops are being shipped out of the country primarily for export and being produced there. So cocoa is in this same category of ag commodities, right?
But that idea of I want to help you, and because I'm on the other side of the supply chain, I'm going to show you how to do what you do.
Yes, exactly.
And it's so
right?
pompous, isn't it?
So what could possibly go wrong? Right?
I can't even imagine.
Well, yeah. So, there's a couple things. Now, there are brilliant people in the coffee industry.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the hallmarks, I think, of somebody who's very educated, and I work with a lot of PhDs and that kind of thing at this level. And one of the things that you see as a through line is that if you're highly educated and highly qualified, one characteristic that strings through all of these folks is that they really know what they don't know. And they they never venture a professional opinion about something that they don't know about. There's no, you know, so if you're a PhD, that tendency to BS your way, you know, about stuff that maybe, you know, you're vaguely familiar with, that doesn't happen at when people are highly educated or highly professional. And so I think that the folks in the coffee industry really there were many people who were there that said, you know what, I'm a roaster trying to help a farmer. I don't know anything. Okay, let me go to Google, right? Let me try to actually, you know, get all the information that's got to be available up in the north in the rich countries about coffee. Let me find all this coffee research that's probably been happening for years and bring that to my producer and be helpful. And these roasters went looking for that information.
And it wasn't there.
Right. And so this is, I think, was the germ of world coffee research. And I think this was the seed of that. So then there's a period of time where you're heightening the awareness of, okay, well, really, what is the science gap? What is happening? And so that's when, you know, some ag R&D PhDs begin to come into the picture, and Tim Schilling, who is the CEO of World Coffee Research, really came in, and he firsthand discovered the limitations of the ag R&D research that was out there. He was part of he was one of the first folks over into Rwanda post genocide, and he was part of a big USAID project to restart agriculture in Rwanda. You know, so basically you had a huge knowledge base had been murdered, essentially. Many of the men who were doing the agriculture. And so they had a huge problem with restarting that and re-educating and doing extension and farmer services. And so Tim saw that in Rwanda, there were like 10,000, 15,000 families growing coffee. And at the time, Rwandan coffee had a very, very bad reputation. and it was actually Rwandan coffee was being sold at like 80% of the C price.
Wow.
Just because it was typically flawed, and it just
was it being traded on the C market at 80% of the C price?
That was how it was being sold, right? So if you were a Rwandan coffee farmer, you had a 20% hit, right, just because you were from Rwanda.
How does that work? Do you know?
How does the C market work?
No, because that's super complex. I mean, if you're trading on the C market, is it just another trade where they're saying we're not going to give you we don't want this coffee for the actual C price, we're just going to pay you 20% less than whatever the offering price is right now?
Yeah, well, the C price is kind of the base, and then you get variations, differentials above and below C price. So if it's a heavily defected coffee, you're going to have a negative differential in order to move that coffee. And so there was a built-in negative differential for Rwandan coffee. And so Dr. Schilling began to look for information around quality and coffee production, like what information is there about how do you increase the quality from the farmer point of view. And this is really where he saw that there was zero information based on this. Most of the information, what information there is very focused on yield, very focused on maybe even some disease prevention. La Roya has been plaguing coffee for many, many years. And so it's not that there's no research in coffee, but specifically around the kind of research that the specialty industry needs wasn't there. So he began to do this work, and he literally, he did his own beneficios. He got all kinds of washing stations going in Rwanda. He at one point he actually started his own roastery in Rwanda.
Really?
Yeah.
I can't imagine how he got a roaster over there with any ease.
Yeah, well, Probot, they're everywhere.
They really are.
Probably talk to Vim Aving. He can get you he can get you a roaster, you name it. But and he also developed, Tim also at that point, so he did begin working on the coffee. They did significantly improve the quality of the Rwandan coffee, and he then reached out to specific roasters, and there were some early roasters that were buying this coffee, Community Coffee. Keurig Green Mountain at the time was buying this coffee. I believe Pete's was also buying containers of this coffee. And so that actually got Dr. Schilling connected to the roasting industry and the buyers of green coffee in a significant way. And so after that whole project was resounding success, very great project. Then Tim's next thing was really, hey, we've uncovered this Achilles heel in the coffee industry. What are we going to do about it? And so there were a series of meetings, and there was a small group of mainly U.S. roasters that came together and committed about $5 million that would be paid over the first 5 years of World Coffee Research's existence. And so basically they had a budget of about $1 million a year for the first 5 years. And that's what Tim said that WCR needed. If we're going to do anything, I can't do anything for less than $1 million a year to get this thing started. And so we need to have at least that level of commitment from the industry. And if the industry is ready for that, great. If not, then this is an idea that gets shelved. And so really the industry came forward and said, no, we need this. This is something that we need for our benefit, for our producers' benefit. This is something that has to happen. And so they did pony up, and the largest contributor of that group was actually Keurig Green Mountain. And that was largely, that had a lot to do with Lindsay Bolger's leadership on that particular topic. Yeah.
So if I understand it correctly, Dr. Schilling is, for lack of a better term, the owner per se of World Coffee Research?
Founder, yeah. Founder, okay. Yeah.
And it's a non-profit.
That's right.
So it's basically trying to better the industry from a non-commercial standpoint, from what I'm understanding.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Right. It's called pre-competitive.
pre-competitive. Thank you for
That's
that little bit of knowledge. I like that. So I did have a look at the three objectives, the three main objectives of what WCR is working very heavily at, and was super impressed at the succinctness and the mission and the drive and the clarity on which you guys are operating. And I mean, I'm sure you know them all off by heart. Do you want to talk a little bit about them?
Well, which ones are you looking at there?
So I've got the ones, the three that you sent me.
So
yeah, the breeding, excuse me, the breeding climate smart coffee varieties, the international multi-location variety trial, and taking it to the farmer with global coffee monitoring program.
Yeah.
I also wanted to mention that I enjoyed that article that you sent me about coffee in Australia, written by Sprudge.
I thought that was good.
As an Australian who read that article, I had to restrain myself from getting annoyed at that, only because I'm like, Lee, this is comedy. This is not a serious article. He's just poking fun. So totally chill out. But that's, I think, the reaction he was looking at getting from everybody. I think it was Cam Caldwell from Texas that wrote that article. He's one of the editors at Sprudge, and I think he was looking for that specific reaction from Australians. And he got it from this Australian. But do you want to talk a little bit about those three objectives? Because I think that's a really great way to segue into some of the specifics of what WCR does.
Great. Yes, I agree. So, there's three things there, and the succinctness that you talk about, I appreciate that, because a huge piece of what we have done at World Coffee Research is how do we explain what this is to people who don't have an agronomy background, who don't have an agriculture background. There's a phenomenon called it's a psychological phenomenon called the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Okay.
I don't know if you've heard of this, but you might want to Google it a little bit. There's some great stuff on it. But the Dunning-Kruger effect is when you're so ignorant of a topic that you don't know how ignorant you are.
Okay.
So,
well, that doesn't exist at all in the coffee industry, at all. I mean, everyone in the coffee industry knows everything, don't you know?
Well, that's not exactly true. I mean, I know there's a lot of people who really do check their knowledge at the door and have this really under control. But you can get a little bit of that, and so
yes.
So one of the things that happened. So for instance, one of the dangers that happens with the Dunning and Kruger effect is that let's say a roaster goes to origin, and they want to help the economic sustainability of that particular producer, and they have a great idea. And this idea is, hey, you should plant geisha, right? Because this is what geisha is going for on the market. You could increase your, blah, 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 be a great investment. I would buy your geisha, all this kind of thing. But not have the knowledge that, hey, geisha grows well in a very narrow range of environmental conditions, and you are not going to get those high prices if it's not grown in the right location, and it's very susceptible to fungus and many other diseases. So you're not, as people are making this recommendation, they're not aware of the risk that they're asking this producer to take on as well. So that's a case of sort of the Dunning-Kruger, where people meaning well, who don't have the whole picture, start offering advice and information. And so there's a lot of that in coffee right now.
And of course, the farmers on the other end are thinking, well, if this person's going to buy what I'm going to grow and they're telling me that this is what they want, well, why won't I? I'm trying to feed my family here. That's
exactly right. And that's the other piece, is that producers also don't have this information about agronomy. Even though they're the ones growing the crop, they just don't have this information by and large about how their variety interacts with the environment, or really what is the most profitable way to grow this particular variety. This is stuff that is not well known or not universally known across the coffee growing region. So back to your initial thing, there's really sort of 4 pillars.
Okay.
You mentioned 3. There's a 4th actually in there, and I think you'll understand it when I get to it. So we're breeding new coffee varieties. And what the story there is that, and this gets everybody both excited and very nervous at the same time.
I think I know why it's getting people nervous. Me being someone who has a genetics degree and have been very concerned about GMOs and things like that, I think that's where you're going with this, right?
Yeah, that's definitely part of it.
Yeah.
It's definitely part of it. It's not the whole thing. It's just that, again, that there's a lot of people just don't know about coffee and genetics very well. So
Right.
I've heard things like this, for instance. I've heard, well, if you guys develop a new coffee variety and everybody plants that new variety, isn't, the diversity of our coffee is going to really go down. And then with diversity of coffee plants being all kind of monocropped, doesn't that open us up to this whole big problem, right? I mean, of having low diversity, and then the crop is susceptible to the same crop is susceptible to the same diseases, and there's great risk. And so those folks, for instance, don't understand that that 80 to 90% of the coffee already being grown is very genetically narrow. I mean, they're brothers and sisters, really, of one another, of Typica being one of the main ones that went to the Isle of Bourbon from Yemen, and then a mutation in the Isle of Bourbon. I can't remember the name of the island now. It's no longer called Bourbon, but it is where the name of that variety came from. And so there was a mutation there, and that sort of changed the trajectory of the genetics a little bit from Typica to Typica and Bourbon. And then these varieties are really the main varieties that went around the world at that point. And a lot of the breeding that took place was also very related in this little close-knit family. So you're not talking about a tremendous amount of genetic distance between the plants that were bred. So what World Coffee Research is doing, on the other hand, with this new variety development, is we're bringing in, there's 1,000 Ethiopian land races in the Cartier collection, for instance, and the vast majority of these haven't been cupped, aren't really commercially viable for one reason or another. Maybe their yields are low, or their growth habit is too tall or too flimsy, or any number of things, but it is a coffee variety. And what we're doing is we're picking those as the sort of the father plants, and then taking pollen from those plants and literally painting that pollen onto some of our plants, the coffee plants that have characteristics that we know and love, like the Bourbons or the Typicas, or maybe it's a Catamor or Sarchamore that has some disease resistance with it. So what we are actually doing is increasing the genetic base
Gene pool.
and the gene pool, right, of that. And like I mentioned, we're not doing it using any kind of GMO kind of devices, any kind of CRISPR-like devices where you're inserting very specific genes or turning specific genes on and off. We're really just doing it the old-fashioned way, but using genetic information to help us pick parents.
So it is a form of genetically modifying, but the old school techniques of doing it. It's not any kind of insidious, big ag coming in and fucking with the trees so that they can splice in antibiotics or anything like that into the gene pool and making them resistant that way, right?
That's right. And this is in breeding, in plant breeding, it's called genetic improvement.
Yes.
That is the phrase that breeders, whether you're breeding apricots or strawberries, you're trying to improve the genetics through bringing crosses together. And this happens, of course, in animals too, right?
Yes.
Or sheep and cows and all that kind of stuff.
I've got to ask you a question there, because I think that's always fascinated me, and I'm guilty of this as well. When I was a barista for 15 plus years, I knew I was working with this product that came from a far, far away land, and I never at all really had anything to do with green bean. And so I was very disconnected from the supply chain. My job was to, and I was very cognizant of the idea that I am the representative of the 100 hands or so that have touched this coffee before it's gotten to me. And it's my job to do the best that I possibly can to represent this coffee well. But that was about as connected I was to the supply chain. Why has it taken us so long as an industry to look at coffee? And I still don't think that we're there, but why has it taken us so long to view coffee as an ag product in the same way that we look at bananas or watermelons or wheat or soybeans? I mean, we don't really, when we buy bananas for home, we think, oh, we know that this grew in the ground and we know all of this stuff and it's come from either Mexico or somewhere here in the States, whatever. Why do you think it's taken us so long as an industry to start to care about the other end of the supply chain?
That's a good question, and I don't know that I have a really good answer for you. I mean, the obvious thing is that there's a tremendous distance both in culture and language and location between the final consumer and where the product is grown. I think that contributes to this distance. One of the beautiful, phenomenal things is this coffee supply chain.
Oh yeah.
And there is just not very many instances in the world where a supply chain reaches into some of the most remote places on this planet and is a supply line for cash and well-being for so many of our most vulnerable people on the planet. So there's such a potential for
huge
for good, but also for exploitation.
I don't know if you heard the episode with Ollie from Condesa Collab, and you can see the photos of what I'm about to tell you on our Instagram. But Ollie was telling us about this remote farm it's not even really a farm, in PNG, where they have to they take a truck or a pickup for 12 hours drive, and then it's an 18-hour walk to get to this remote little area of PNG where they're trying to get this coffee out from. And he took this photo of this woman who is so proud of the way she processes her coffee, because she does it using a round stone, and she hand depulps every single cherry with this rock one at a time.
There you go.
I mean, that's the beauty of what we're dealing with. Like, that's the care that we're responsible for at this end of the supply chain. It is really magical. Yeah.
Yeah. No question about it. No question about it.
And
so, yeah, go ahead.
No, well, what it sounds like is that World Coffee Research is really trying to enhance that so that we have a supply chain that thrives beyond this kind of narrow belt of science that we currently have access to. Is that right?
Yes, that is right. That's exactly right. So you have in general a plant. Mm-hmm. What a plant tries to do on its own with Mother Nature is it tries to adapt to the location that it finds itself.
Right.
Okay. And if you find a plant growing naturally someplace and it's native to that area, you can bet that the genetics are in line to support its growth in that particular location. Mm-hmm. Coffee, on the other hand, as we know, it originated in Ethiopia, went to Yemen for a while, and from Yemen was spread around the world, and mostly two varieties. Okay. So what you essentially had is a plant that was highly adapted to its home, okay, but it had commercial value. So it made it worthwhile to, let's see where this thing will grow. Mm. And if it can grow and we can get coffee out of it, great, because there's a market in London, there's a market in Italy, there's a market where we can actually sell this. So this would be fantastic. So in other words, it was taking a variety that's highly adapted to one set of environments and just trying it everywhere. And if it worked good, fantastic. Hey, we get it up on Blue Mountain in Jamaica, really works well there. Really works well there, right? But
you wonder what took them to, what made them go up there to try that? I mean, was it just people saying, oh, well, we're noticing that it's growing on the sides of the bottom of the mountain. Let's see what happens if we go to elevation.
Who knows, right? Exactly. Available land, somebody's got some seeds, somebody's got some plantlets, you know, and things start going in the ground, and then before you know it, somebody says, hey, this is doing quite well. It's growing well, it cups well. Let's try this. So, but typically, so that's a big problem for coffee farmers around the world, because where typically you would have a producer selecting a variety of crop, a variety of a specific crop, let's say wheat or rice or whatever, they will select a variety that has been adapted to their local conditions. Mm-hmm. Where coffee, that's not how it happened. And so, in other words, typically a farmer picks the variety. And in coffee, it's like the variety has picked the farmer.
And is the farmer, and excuse my ignorance with all of this, I'm still learning, which is why I wanted to have a conversation with you about this. Is the farmer given options at that point? Are they just given some coffee plants and said and told, see if this grows? I mean, what traditionally has been the way that that's been approached?
What I'm seeing and what my understanding is as of today is that identification of coffee down to the variety is a relatively new phenomenon.
Okay. So it was just a coffee plant.
It was just a coffee plant. Here's coffee, right?
Here's some coffee.
And this is what's going. This is what's growing down the street, and so the farmer's giving you seed, and you know, and somebody maybe along the way said, yes, this is Bourbon, or this is Tipica, or this is a Pacamara, or this is a Catuai or Catura. They, you know, somebody along the way identifies the variety, and so the farmer sort of knows that.
And if it doesn't grow, what they're saying is, no, coffee can't grow in this part of Costa Rica. Coffee doesn't grow.
Coffee doesn't grow. That's right.
Not this particular varietal doesn't grow. And I think this is where you guys come in, right? It
is. So as we're looking forward, there's a lot of, you know, we're hearing about a lot of threats to coffee, right? Where the biggest threat is that coffee growing isn't economically sustainable. Number one. So the most endangered thing about coffee is the coffee producer right now, and that they are struggling to make a living.
And can you explain what you mean by that for people who are listening and don't understand, just in simple terms, why something isn't economically viable to grow?
Yeah, in simple terms, you've got the cost of production, you know, so that's going to be your labor and all your input costs. And when you finally sell all the cherry, you are in the red.
You're making a loss. You know, we talk a lot about that.
Right.
With regards to especially the sea market crashing in the middle of last year, it
doesn't help.
It doesn't help any of it, does it?
No, that doesn't help. So that is a confounding piece. So that's the number one threat to coffee, is that coffee producers themselves are struggling, and you can't have a solid supply chain if your producers are food insecure 3 months out of the year.
It's quite devastating, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like when you think about it that way, these people literally cannot eat.
Right.
Or they're struggling to eat.
And this was actually part of Keurig Green Mountain. They did some of the first surveys of producers, and they were the ones that discovered, oh, look at our supply chain. A whole lot of folks that we're buying green coffee from, that we depend on, that everything that our business is about depends on, the producers are food insecure. And it's a thing called los meses flacos.
Los meses flacos.
Yeah, the skinny months.
Oh wow.
That was what the producers called it, and it was like a 3-month period of time where just cash was low and
the downtime.
So Keurig went into action, and one of their actions was helping to support WCR, as well as working with other organizations like TechnoServe to improve the farming skills of farmers, to give them some additional information about good agricultural practices to increase their yields, their quality, and decrease their risk. So that was sort of the beginning movement of that. And yeah, so.
This reminds me of a conversation I was having with Kieran Westlake. He's the president of ASCA. We were having this conversation on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, in that it's one thing that our industry is finally starting to, I wouldn't say that we're starting to understand it, because en masse, still, when I talk to everybody I can about this, and there's still so many people that have no idea that essentially we could run out of coffee. It could become a luxury item if we don't do something about this. And it's one thing for people who work in the industry to care about it, but it's a whole other thing to get the general public to get on board with the fact that we're in a state of essentially crisis, well, pre-crisis, if we don't do something about it now.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of truth in what you're saying. Absolutely.
Is World Coffee Research considering that aspect of it, or are you guys clearly okay?
Totally. Those 3 points that you mentioned, the breeding of new coffee varieties, the International Multi-Location Variety Trial, and the Global Coffee Monitoring Program are 3 initiatives that together make a strategy to deliver, to really move the needle on economic sustainability for farmers in the shortest amount of time possible. So let me talk about each one of those a little bit more.
Sure.
We talked about this idea of improved variety, or the genetic improvement of coffee plants, and so how we're kind of doing that. We're taking distant plants. Okay, we're going outside of the community of the small group of coffee that we love, and we're bringing new genes in, and we're finding some great things that are happening from that. And one of the phenomena in breeding, both for plants and animals, is this concept called heterosis. And heterosis is vigor, and it happens in the first generation when you cross 2 genetically distant organisms of the same species. So if you cross, a Typica with a Bourbon, you're not going to really see heterosis, because those are so closely related. Right. There's not much genetic distance. If you find something like a Geisha and a Bourbon, and Geisha is more of closer to an Ethiopian landrace, and you breed that with a Bourbon, now you've got genetic distance between those parents, and the children from that cross are vigorous, like crazy vigor.
Wow.
Okay. And when I say crazy vigor, I mean like 2 times.
Really?
Yes. Yeah.
And the vigor under which they'll proliferate and growth.
So we're talking about twice the stem diameter, twice the height, grows twice as fast per day. We're talking twice the yield. We're talking strength like it. The International Multi-Location Variety Trial in Laos got killed with frost. Okay, and the F1s survived. The F1s were fine.
Wow.
Right. So when I say vigor, it's not like, oh, that plant's doing well, it's nice and green.
Yeah, it's not like a thumbs up.
Thumbs up. No, I'm talking about,
this is legit.
This is legit. This is typically a Bourbon plant. I was talking to a producer in El Salvador who grows Bourbon, and she says, really, it's 4 years from the time I put a plantlet in the ground, Bourbon, before I'm going to get a real harvest from that plant. It's going to be 4 years for that plant to grow up. Year 3, there may be some cherries, but not really. These F1 hybrids, 2 years.
Okay.
They're producing cherry after 2 years, not 4 years, right?
Amazing. I mean, this immediately can, within the space of 2 years, we could double the world's crops theoretically.
Without deforesting one more hectare of land
Wow. So let's talk about this F1, because there's a lot of people talking about F1 right now. So what is F1?
F1 means the F in F1 corresponds to filial, and filial just means son or daughter of.
Yeah.
Okay. And 1 means the first son or daughter of. So that's what an F1 is. So it's not a variety. An F1 isn't a variety. It's just the first cross of any two things.
So it's the first crop of and correct me if I'm wrong, the first crop of the crossbreeding of two genetically distant varietals. Is that correct?
Yes, and it's actually the first generation of any cross is F1. But to get heterosis, you need the genetic distance too, yes.
Okay, so, but in this instance, is F1, do you know what was crossed?
Yeah, well, we have, so WCR right now, we have about 75 different F1s in development. So we have 75 different crosses.
Okay.
And I can show you a chart or email you the chart that tells you what Ethiopian land races were used and what were the
if you could, that would be great.
Made.
My little
Absolutely.
Genetic mind is going.
The Ethiopian land races don't really have names; they just have numbers, like TR 147 and things like that. But some of the Ethiopian land races do have names, like geisha, for instance, is one of them. So if something has become more popular, it does get a common name.
So with that, is every geisha a geisha, or are there varietals?
There are
variabilities. I don't want to misuse
I'm not an
terms
expert on this, but from what I understand is that there's like 3 geisha-like varieties. And through Peterson geisha, it's a little different.
Okay.
Yeah.
And does that typically happen through deliberate genetic modification, whether it be through traditional methods or in the lab?
Mm-hmm.
But is that something, how does that eventuate?
So geisha was just, Cartier, for instance, is this germplasm collection of over 1,000 varieties of coffee, publicly available, one of the few. And geisha was one of those plants in that collection that had been taken by the Peterson family and planted on the farm. They were just trying stuff. They had access to the Cartier collection.
Is that Peter's on the Esmeralda farm in Panama?
Yes.
Right.
Yep. Rachel.
Delicious coffees.
They're brilliant. Yes.
Yeah, they are.
And so they had this stuff planted, from what I understand, they had this stuff planted on the plantation for years and years and years, but it wasn't,
Hello, Greg. Hello, Greg. Oh.
Oh, there we go.
Okay, great. So let's start that bit again. So the Petersons.
Yeah, so the Petersons had one of these Ethiopian land races, and I guess I'm not sure about how it was named or how the name was actually identified, but they had it growing on their farm for years. But it wasn't. They had it growing at different elevations and in different locations on the farm.
Experimentally, or was this just?
I think so. Exactly. They were just trying stuff, and it didn't cut very well. At where most of their production was happening. Okay. Or maybe they picked it and it was mixed in with some other beans. Not 100% sure, but they had, I think, some kind of fire or something happened that wiped out a significant portion of the plantation. And so they went to they found this coffee that was growing.
Hello, Greg.
Yep.
Okay.
So they found this coffee that was growing at a higher elevation, and they cupped it, and it was, geisha, like the real thing, right? Because they actually cupped the geisha growing from a very specific environmental conditions on their farm, And when grown under those conditions, the beauty of geisha really showed. But now geisha is a traditional landrace. So that means it is, when you take the seed from a geisha plant and put it in the ground and the babies sprout up, they look like geisha plants. So you can propagate a geisha plant by seed. So it's considered a pure line variety.
Wow. And what did they find? Well, first of all, how did they get a different, it's not a different varietal, it's like a sub-varietal, I guess, of the varietal. Is that right?
I'm not sure what you mean. I'm not sure what you're talking about.
Well, when we were saying the difference in the types of geisha plants. Yes.
And I don't have the story on that.
Okay.
I don't know about these different varietals. I think they are, so when you get into the Cartier collection and amongst the Ethiopian land races, there are varieties that are very genetically similar. Okay. So it could be that there are very close cousins to geisha.
Without being
yes.
Right. Okay.
So I think
that's a small gene pool thing again, isn't it?
That's a small, well, yes, that's part of that. So so geisha and Bourbon and Typica and most of the varieties that we consume and that are grown around the world are considered pure line varieties. And what a pure line variety means is that when seed is produced by that plant, and you can take seed from it, put it in the ground, and the plants that come up will look like the plant.
The parent plant. Okay, wow.
So that means it's a pure line variety. Now, here's how F1s work. It's a little different. When an F1 drops its seed, it's very early in the process of coming up with a new variety. Because this is naturally how new varieties are made in nature. Let's say you got a coffee plant on one side of the mountain and another coffee plant with genetic distance on the other side of the mountain, right? You got a little animal, eats some cherry on one side of the mountain,
goes for a walk, takes a crap.
There you go. And you've got suddenly two plants next to each other with genetic distance. And what happens is that is something that nature really needs and appreciates.
So they pollinate each other?
That's right. They cross-pollinate at that point. Then this first generation that comes up from that cross-pollination is the F1 generation. And those F1s, they're vigorous, right? They got all that great strength to them. So they grow up, they produce a lot of seed. They produce it faster, they produce it better, they drop seed all over the place. Then what happens is that seed grows up and it is hundreds of different looking coffee plants.
Because you've got genetic diversity amongst them.
That's right.
Wow.
Right. So this is where nature typically comes in and starts selecting for this particular environmental location, right? So if one of those little plantlets comes up is weak for that environmental condition, well, Mother Nature kills it.
It's Darwinism.
Yeah, that's right. Darwinism. And if the conditions are right for that, and we know that at least half of these plants have a lot of genetics from a plant that was already there, so a locally adapted plant. So we know a good number of these are going to be very highly adapted. So what happens is that then the F2 generation grows up, right? Nature selects some of the winners, kills off some of the losers. F2 happens, and that's exactly what happens again, right? Maybe this year, the drought really hits this area, and this area is prone to droughts. And these varieties don't do well in drought, so they all died, right? But there were some survivors, right? And those survivors go to the F3 generation. And again, the F3, the plants self-pollinate, the seed drops. And again, even in F3, there's segregation. You get all of those little coffee plants, but not as much as in F1 and F2. So those grow up, and you have this process of seeds going down until you get to about generation F6 or F7. And at that point, the coffee plant has self-pollinated 6 or 7 times. Mother Nature has selected the winners and killed off the losers. And you have a new coffee plant in that location that is both highly adapted to that location because one of its mothers or fathers came from that location, but also it's bringing new genetics from the other side of the mountain that were not available to it over here. And so now, but what happens here is that at the F6 or F7 generation, because you have self-pollinated this plant 6 times to stabilize the variety, you also break the genetics, or you lose genetics along the way.
Right.
Okay. And those genetics that you lost are exactly the genetics that make the F1 a super plant.
Which could thrive in other climates.
So the F1 that is a characteristic of an F1 because it has all the genetics of both mother and father in the F1. It has a toolkit to deal with a wide range of environmental conditions. If it goes to 6 generations, what happens is that the genetics, they lose genetics that the environment doesn't really need, and it loses genetics that are actually that inhibit the plant growth in that location. But you essentially lose genetic tools as you go down this 7 generations. So what's happening in modern agriculture is really trying to tap F1s whenever possible in this heterosis piece. The problem with F1s and keeping an F1 and F1 is, how do you propagate it?
Right.
Because suddenly the natural propagation is going to create that segregation.
And it's usually by accident, right? It's not something that you can necessarily always replicate within the...
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. So you will have, if you take the seed from, let's say there is an F1 is Star Maya, for instance, is a new F1 that's commercially available. Single O was selling it, is selling it now as a single origin. And the when the F1 produces seeds and those seeds go in the ground, you have I don't actually know how it segregates. I think it's definitely a couple hundred different looking coffee plants representing
on one tree.
From the F1. The F1 is going to deliver like 150 different babies. Every combination of dominant and recessive genes that are found in the parents are expressed in the F2 generation. Not in the F1 generation. Strangely enough, the F1 generation mostly looks homogeneous. It looks the same, right? So what's happening in ag right now is that agriculture is utilizing cloning in order to duplicate, or cuttings in order to duplicate exact copies of the F1 in order to maintain all that genetic material into a single plant and have it be this very productive, highly adapted plant. So that process is called somatic embryogenesis. And this is where you take like leaf cells, so you take coffee leaves, cut them up into little pieces, you put them in a solution that essentially change the leaf cells from coffee leaf cells into coffee embryonic cells. Okay, and so now once they're coffee embryonic cells, they can become an entire coffee plant. You add some growth hormone, and you've got billions of these little embryonic coffee cells in there, and they all sprout up into coffee plants. And then scientists go into the beakers, pull out a bunch of salad, pick out different plantlets, put them into individual test tubes, and boom, right? You've got these F1s that are ready to go to the nursery and be planted like you would plant a seed. But it's a little tiny coffee plant, that's only an inch big, and it's in a test tube.
And if I understand this correctly, what you guys are doing is sending these F1s across the world to see where they're going to thrive.
That is definitely what we're doing as part of our work. That's right. So that's the testing process of the F1s. And there's also some F1s that were available before World Coffee Research came on board. So there's a coffee breeder by the name of Benoit Bertrand, who was WCR's chief breeder for the first 5 years of our existence. but he was like the coffee breeder. Like
Wow.
and he did a project with Searod and Ecom and did some development, and they developed 3 different F1 hybrids. One is called the Central Americano, the other one is Munda Maya, and the other one is Star Maya. And so these were developed by Benoit Bertrand and Ecom, and we are testing those for sure in the international multi-location variety trials, and we're testing those in the Global Coffee Monitoring Program for profitability right now. But on top of those, we've got 75 new ones that that haven't cherried, cherried, right? So they're actually the first 40 are going to cherry or have cherried this year, and the next 25 will be producing cherry next year. So we're really getting very close to cupping some of these and really getting some good data about which ones do we die and which ones do we take to the next.
That must be so exciting, Greg.
It is very exciting, and it's exciting for me.
I'm kind
of
jealous I'm not on your team, to be honest.
Yeah,
the geneticist in me is like, oh, I want to come clean the lab again. I miss it. It's been so many years. This is, the thing is, I hated being in the lab because I was in the lab on my own doing stuff I wasn't really passionate about, and that's why I went into the corporate world. But this is the kind of stuff. It's like, this is exactly the kind of genetics I should have been doing. But 20 years ago, this wasn't a focus.
Right. No, it wasn't even on the map. It wasn't even on the map. So, there's a little, I give you a little primer on F1 hybrids and how they're different than pure line varieties. The positive side of the F1 hybrid is that they're vigorous and they produce well. And by the way, Central Americano took 5 of the top 11 spaces in the Cup of Excellence in 2018 in Nicaragua.
With F1s?
With F1s, with the Central Americano. So these things have great cupping potential. They also have disease resistance, which was the whole
naturally
built.
They haven't been modified genetically through
GMO.
GMO. No, this is natural plant resistance.
That's right. A genetic source of plant resistance.
Right.
And this happens in wheat. This happens in hazelnuts. I mean, fungus is something that attacks everything.
Yes.
And so agriculture breeders are always trying to stay a step ahead of the funguses that are mutating and changing to find a new food source. And
am I right in saying that's the cause of coffee rust?
That is exactly right.
Yes, that's the big problem with that, isn't it? That they have to wash the trees and try and get rid of the fungus that's causing the coffee rust, and that causes a big problem throughout the whole kind of region that it's found in. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes. There's really no washing of the trees, but what they end up doing is spraying fungicides in order to try to control the fungus.
Yes.
And that means extra labor, extra cost. That means degradation to the soil, degradation to the water systems, degradation to the humans who spray it, right? Because it's chemicals. Because it's chemicals.
And is it so this is kind of going back to my thing of how did we as an industry not really connect back to the back end of the supply chain if we're so dependent on this second most traded commodity in the world, and yet we seemed to dismiss the back end of the supply chain that was providing us with this commodity that we were pushing onto Western culture.
Well, I think the consumers and the traders and the green coffee buyers and the and the importers and the roasters, they're just not agronomists. They're not.
Okay, that's fair.
They're not farmers. So we
just trusted that the farmers knew what was going on.
That's right, and also the specialty wasn't a thing.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's fair.
This is huge. Specialty. People drank coffee. It kind of was lousy, and we liked it that way. It was bitter. We put sugar in it. It was cheap and nasty. It was coffee, and we knew it tasted lousy, but we drank it anyway.
Do you want to hear a staggering statistic that I heard yesterday? So in a few weeks, we're having someone from Nestle on the podcast. And I was talking to somebody, I didn't know that this was a career, but he is a specialist in ideation for Nestle.
Okay.
How many cups a second do you think Nestle makes?
Oh my God. I don't know. It's a lot, but I don't know.
6,000 cups a second.
Right? Yeah.
That's just Nescafe.
Right. That's a lot of coffee.
6,000 cups. That comes straight from Nestle themselves. 6,000. I had no idea. I mean, I wouldn't have even known where to start with that number, but 6,000 a second. And that is, that's just the coffee. They're not caring about, we just need lots of coffee to make that volume.
That's right. They just need lots of coffee.
It's going to be a fascinating conversation that we're going to have with him. They do something like 100 ton per day.
Wow. No, it's huge. And Jacob Dow Egberts is huge, and they're doing similar kind of volume, and I was talking with some folks over there, and they're talking about like their price point is like 5 cents a cup.
It's staggering.
Right? That's what JDE is doing. And a lot of people look at JDE and as these big green buyers that are taking advantage of all these producers and by buying their beans below the cost of production and everything else. But I'll tell you, again, as a coffee outsider coming in and taking a look at this, JDE, they buy all the coffee that a farmer produces, not just the micro lot, not just the top 10% of the crop. They buy it all, and
it's astronomical amounts. Like
it's astronomical.
And
it's vital to coffee producers. Industry. Because coffee producers, a typical coffee farmer may have, where they sell this part of their farm at this price, and that part of their farm at a different price because it's lower elevation or it's just not producing at the same quality. And then they average, the profit of the entire farm, right? And that's how they get their income. So they really need that specialty because that's going to be coming in at $3+ a pound that they may be getting for that. And they're also going to be selling some that's got lower differentials for their lower quality coffee or coffee that has higher defects. And again, that's an oversimplification. There's co-ops, there's all kinds of things in there that complicate this, but in a basic sense, the most important thing for coffee producers is that they're able to sell all their coffee, not just the best for specialty. And so the Nestle's and the JDEs that are out there, this is a really key. I was talking with Falcon Coffee, Conrad Britz last week. And, without revealing what their volumes are, I will tell you that their commercial sale was 34 times more volume than their specialty sale.
It's not surprising at all, though, is it?
34. Yeah. Right?
Well, I mean, we absolutely are so masturbatory in the specialty coffee world about how fucking important we are when we're this tiny little piece of what's going on. I mean, and we are an important piece in it, but nowhere near as important as those big companies that are essentially supporting the whole industry. Right.
Exactly. And, that's another thing that I want to say too, just as, kind of as this outsider coming into the coffee industry. I can't say that I haven't seen any actors behaving in bad faith. Like just up and down, no matter how big the coffee company is, no matter how small the coffee company is, everybody really wants to do right by the producer. Everybody is willing to lend a hand to improve the economic sustainability of producers. Everybody realizes how dependent they are on the producer. Okay, so it's not like the producer is being taken for granted. In this way, I'm really seeing. I haven't seen that. I haven't seen anybody who's just.
Well, I definitely.
Who the hell cares about these producers? There's always going to be coffee,
Yeah, no. Well, I definitely know that there are companies out there and that are treating coffee farmers not well. But like in everything, I tend to think that it's the people in the middle. It's never the people that are at the bottom of the any kind of scale that treat other people badly. I tend to think that a lot of the people at the top are hyper aware of their dependency on these people. And so they want to kind of work to a let's conspire to get each other, you know, both to a great space. I think it's the ones in the middle who tend to be looking at how can I claw away and get a little bit more of a profit. And in my experience of the people that I've spoken to, the green buyers who I've had on the show and spoken to off air about, you know, how much of this stuff goes on. It definitely does go on. There definitely is slavery that happens on coffee farms. There definitely is sex trafficking that happens on coffee farms. And not all coffee farms, not even most coffee farms, but it definitely does happen. I've spoken to people who know about it that's going on, and it's why I've been very deliberate in my other business, Elixir Specialty Coffee, in making sure anybody that we use as a roaster has sourced the coffee through a relationship and they've paid a fair price, because I don't want myself or anyone that works for me complicit in shitty supply chain practices. And that's the responsibility that we've taken on, because we've decided that if you've chosen to put our product into your body, we take that very seriously, and we're going to make sure that you don't have to bear any kind of weird kind of karma.
Moral implication.
Yeah, moral implication, right? Like
right.
Karma,
moral or ethical implications.
Exactly, indirectly.
You appreciate. Right.
Exactly. And it's something that I'm very passionate about getting across in this podcast is that through our employment choices, through our coffee purchasing choices, we are making a direct choice to either be complicit in shitty supply chain practices or in supply chain practices that really upscale the supply chain. Yeah. And you know, vying for something that's going to thrive into the future. And we are at such a pivotal time in the history of our industry and the history of the supply chain, because it's going to go one of two ways.
Yes. No question about it. No question about it. And there are some systemic things that are driving some of this. And for instance, you know, when you realize a green coffee trader is going to make a bonus based on how low they keep the differentials.
Yes.
Like that's how they're being rewarded.
Yes.
Okay. Well, that's a systemic issue that's not good.
No.
For the industry.
Exactly.
Right?
And
you should be getting bonus, but not necessarily based on that criteria, right? So I think the industry can continue to do work around this and to improve that contributes to more of the money getting down to producers. But I was actually very encouraged by that report, and I'm trying to remember the name of it now. That it was a big data project, and they had all these specialty importers providing data on all their contracts that they did. So I think there was over 10,000 coffee contracts that were part of this data set, and they were all specialty coffee, and it really took a look at what was the price being paid for this coffee, and the median, so same number above as below, was about $3 a pound. The low,
that's impressive, to be honest.
Right. The low was I can't remember what the low was, but it was like $1.20 a pound or something like that, and the high was like 10.
I have to ask, does WCR have a number where they say it costs X amount of dollars on average to make to produce a pound of commodity coffee?
Well, that moves us right into the Global Coffee Monitoring Program.
Okay.
Which is one of these research efforts that we're doing. So the reality is that nobody has that information across the board. I mean, people have it for maybe their particular environmental conditions or their particular markets, but a coffee farmer can't go to a database and, for instance, and enter in their latitude and longitude, their soil analysis, the market that they want to sell into. You know, like I want to sell my coffee to top specialty, right? Or commercial or whatever that is. The disease threats that are in the area, right? And then get a recommendation for not only what variety should I plant, but how should I take care of those plants in a way that results in me pulling the maximum profit from my land.
Well, there's so many variables, right?
Right.
And you're still not guaranteed any success.
Exactly. So this is why the Global Coffee Monitoring Program is this crazy, historical, never been done. It's actually, coffee is going to leapfrog other agricultural commodities with this research. It is that profound. Yes. So what this is where we're testing two new varieties, two improved varieties using the farmer's existing variety as the control. And we're testing two new agronomic treatments using the farmer's existing agronomic treatment as a control. And so to the farmer, what this looks like is kind of a 3x3 grid, right? And where one row is their local variety going this way, and another row this way, which is their agronomic treatment.
Wow.
Okay. And then they plant an improved variety here and an improved variety here, and you get this sort of 9 squares on the grid. And so you get to see if the farmer just used his existing agronomic treatment with an improved variety, you're going to see the result of that. If the farmer uses the agronomic treatment 1 on his existing variety, and then improved variety 1, improved variety 2, they begin to see the differences there. So what we're doing there is we're monitoring all the inputs. So labor, cost, fertilization, fungicide spraying, whatever it is, goes into the cost of production. And at the end of the day, what happens is that you're going to be able to figure out which combination of ag treatment and variety equals the most profit for that particular farmer. Okay.
That's outstanding.
It's outstanding. But the crazy thing is that that's just one farmer. And what we do is in a region, we put like 80 to 120 of these on-farm technical trials in a given region. Every farmer is picking their own varieties and their own ag treatments that they want to test, right? And so then you get recommendations. You get a representative sample of farming techniques, farming size, location of farm, soil types, and you get to see big data for that particular region. But then it's even crazier, better than that, because instead of with 120 on-farm technical trials in, say, Guatemala, right? Well, you're going to add another 120 for Nicaragua, for Honduras. So you get all this whole Central America, you get Peru, you're doing the same thing in East Africa, you're doing the same thing in Asia. And by the end of the day, you have over 1,100 of these test plots going on. There has never been this kind of data. And it's the reason that there needs to be 1,100 is that's the number that you need to hit in order to have that magical statistical significance.
Okay.
Okay. So it's replicable and it's predictive. And this has been the missing thing. So right now, for instance, let's say a coffee farmer has a field and high altitude goes down to low altitude or lower elevation, and they've got Bourbon planted there, and the Bourbon at 1,600 and higher, doing great. I sell all that to counterculture, or I sell all that to single O. But below that, you know, I'm getting cupping around 80 or 78, and then the low stuff, I just got to sell it on the C market because it's just not hitting the grade. Well, now a farmer can actually go, well, what would happen if I planted Robusta on my lowest elevation? What would my
because
yield
there's a market for Robusta.
There's a market for Robusta. My yield is going to be higher. My cost that I'm going to get for the cherry is lower. But if I quadruple my yield, if I go from a half a ton a hectare to 3 tons a hectare, this thing pencils out. So it's about It's about maximizing the value of that producer's land by having the right combination of variety and ag treatment that maximizes the production on that particular location or region.
You got to wonder why it's taken us so long.
Yes. I mean, yes, right?
Honestly, like I'm sitting here thinking, I've been in this industry for how many years? Why the fuck has it taken us so long? Because we're now in such a dire situation with what's going on. And if we don't have enough
the human
people,
toll is terrible.
Absolutely. And this is where I want to talk about things like climate change and how is that having an effect, because it's shifting weather patterns around the world. And what role is that playing in the agriculture of coffee as it shifts? What are you guys seeing with regards to that?
So there are 4, maybe 5 different kinds of climate zones where coffee is grown. So you're talking about like warm and wet, cool and dry. So these different kind of climatic zones where coffee is currently being grown, and climate change is going to impact each one of those zones in a different way.
Okay.
So what we've done is we've sort of categorized all of the coffee growing lands into these climate zones. And actually one of the things that we're doing is we're able to go to some areas in Africa where we expect a significant portion of, say, Brazilian climate is going to look a lot more like it does in Zambia. Okay.
Due to climate shifting.
So the weather in Zambia today is what it's going to look like in certain parts of Brazil in 2050. So we can actually test plants for 2050 in Zambia, knowing that that's kind of where the climate is going to shift in this particular location. So this is great news.
It's fantastic. I mean, the trajectory of it is fantastic.
Right.
We just have to figure out the transitionary time from here to there and what we're going to do from now till then.
So roasters are seeing now, who go to Origin, are seeing something called coffee is going up the mountain.
The migration.
Migration. So what's happening is that the lower elevations are just becoming less and less suitable, less and less profitable. The results are less and less good. So the coffee grows higher and higher on the mountain, and maybe, you know, where you were only maybe planting at 1,800 feet, this year we're going to go to 1,900 feet. We've got some more land that we can do there. Now, obviously, mountains, there's a limit to how high you can go. How much
of this? Sorry, go on.
Yeah, but that's one of the things that many are seeing in the coffee lands right now. That's the impact of climate change.
How much of this do you think is giving farmers confidence to actually try new things, given that they're starting to see more of an investment and enthusiasm from the front end of the supply chain? Well,
let me tell you, producers love WCR.
I can imagine that. I'm in love with you guys after this conversation.
So one way to look at our work too is that there are 3 major production countries, right? Brazil, Vietnam, Colombia. They're definitely top 3, really producing a lot of coffee. And in particular in Vietnam and Brazil, the cost of they're making a profit.
Yeah.
Vietnamese coffee farmers are not struggling.
No, they're having a good time of it.
They're having a good time of it. And
are they still using quite manual labor, or are they like Brazil? They're using mechanized farming.
My understanding is that it's mostly manual. It's not mechanized, and where they're getting their production efficiencies are, well, all 3 of those countries have one thing in common. They have state-run agricultural research and development efforts happening. Yeah. Okay, and so right off the top, you can see the impact of ag R&D on a sector of coffee. Now, so Embrapa is doing this for Brazil. The FNC is doing this for Colombia, and I don't know the name of the Vietnamese research entity. But in Vietnam, they are producing Robusta varieties. They're breeding Robusta varieties that are locally adapted. They're providing their farmers with a formula for profitability. So they test these varieties. They know how they're going to perform. They know how much fertilizer they need to add. And there's literally here farmer, here's your recipe for profitability, right?
Yeah.
And they are producing, their yields are huge in Vietnam, where you're talking in excess of 3,000 pounds per hectare. No,
Per year.
wait. What is it? 3 tons.
3 tons.
3 tons per hectare.
Per hectare per year.
Per year. And what you're seeing in Central America, to give you some context, is like your specialty bourbon farmer in El Salvador is going to be producing about 0.5 ton per hectare of specialty coffee.
And the support, the agricultural support that they're receiving and the economic support that they're receiving from government, do you believe that that's helping because there's nothing in the way? Other countries seem to experience things like corruption and cartels and all of that kind of stuff that gets in the way of them being able to do business. And education, teaching farmers how to do things. Do you think that having that agricultural support from policymakers and government, et cetera, is just freeing them up to get on with the business of coffee farming?
Absolutely. Yeah. When there is good government policy and good agronomic policy and state-sponsored agronomic research and development, what you're seeing is a relatively healthy coffee producer. Yeah. There's some exceptions to that. I mean, not all your Colombian coffee producers are happy with this low C price, for instance. They're all getting beat up on it, but Brazilians and the Vietnamese are okay. They're okay with it. The Vietnamese are actually holding off selling their coffee because the C prices are low. They can afford to
hold on and wait for it to shoot back up.
To shoot back up, yeah. So there's going to be a lot of stale Robusta hitting the market, I guess.
Gee, we're so sorry about that.
Yeah. Well, after it goes, I was talking with some people at Smuckers and the science people there of what goes in to making instant coffee and what goes into being able to take beans from all over the world, all different grades, and make this consistent process. Wow, that's magic. That's a whole other podcast, let me tell you. Oh
yeah. I was listening to James Hoffman actually talk about it on, you just start watching one YouTube video and you end up watching YouTube videos about cats. I don't know how it always ends up at cats. But in the process of it getting to cat videos, I was watching James Hoffman say how utterly expensive and complicated it is to make instant coffee. And if you're going to do that with high cost of specialty coffee, it just makes it prohibitive.
Yeah, no question.
Now, just quickly before we go, I do want to ask you, if people are thinking about, like, if I wasn't doing all the ridiculously fun things that I was doing in my work and I heard this podcast, I would want to come and get involved somehow. I would want to have a career. Where do you think the careers lie for people that perhaps want to get involved in this side of the coffee industry?
There's sustainability.
Okay.
So, all of, or at least having sort of this coffee sustainability know-how in your background could make you extremely marketable and valuable, whether you're working for a roaster, whether you're working for an importer, whether you're working for an exporter, importer. The sustainability, or even if you're working for a big retailer, say like McDonald's or Dunkin' Donuts, this could also be, a lot of good coffee people working at that level as well. The Costas, and what I'm seeing is that the industry is really, when they're talking about sustainability, economic sustainability, for instance, the tools that people are aware of are quite limited. And these tools don't include agronomic research and development at all. This is surprising, right? Because ag R&D is like the tool.
Yes,
right?
yes.
So yeah, you're trying to build a house without a hammer when you're trying to make coffee sustainable without ag R&D. And And so there is, for instance, the industry is by and large focused on the economic sustainability of farmers. Okay, and the kinds of tools that they're using in order to improve the economic sustainability are things like quality improvements, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's teach these farmers how to grade their coffee, and then they'll know the value. But not only will they know the value, from year to year, they'll be able to try different things in the field and see how that impacts coffee. And so that feedback loop is going to be a good thing. Or they will use things like, hey, let's do some kind of different fermentation process, some kind of post-harvest process that increases the quality. So we're going to really focus on drying on these racks because that seems to make a big difference. We're going to ferment for 24 hours because that seems to make a difference. So there's these post-harvest kinds of production things that people also do to increase the value of the coffee.
Mm.
Access to markets, right, is giving more, if I'm a farmer and I'm selling my beans and I've got more customers, that's going to increase my value. But nowhere in there did you hear anything about, well, what about planting a better variety that produces twice as many beans, or having the information about what kind of soil inputs I should put on this coffee plant in order to ensure my most profit. And those inputs can be, when I say inputs, I'm not just talking about fertilizer. Okay, that's definitely one of the kind of inputs, but I'm also talking about things like an agronomic treatment is something like planting 2 plants in 1 hole. Right?
Okay.
What does that do? Right?
Yeah.
Or shade is an agronomic treatment. So what is the impact of shade on this particular variety?
Because we're starting so late in the game.
Exactly. So as you're moving into the sustainability role, you have to evaluate the effectiveness of the sustainability portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
You need skills to be able to determine that. And what I'm seeing is across the board is that these skills are not well developed or well understood. So, for instance, here's an example of that. Good agricultural practices. This is a key phrase that you hear a lot about increasing the economic viability of farmers. Let's teach producers how to do good agricultural practices. Their yields will go up, their risks will go down, everybody's happy. So TechnoServe, for instance, does this really, really well. And they come in and they know how to cross-culturally work with thousands and thousands of farmers and teach them how to do organic fertilizers and how to prune and how to cover crop and these things that all, when done, if they haven't been done and you do them, you get a pretty significant bump in yield and quality. Now, but think about that for a minute. That's the primary tool that is being used at origin, are good agricultural practices. And literally we're talking about pruning, cover cropping, and fertilization. That is 1940s technology.
Yeah.
Okay. And we're bringing it to the coffee fields today. And yes, it needs to be there. But what we don't have as an industry are, okay, those are good agricultural practices. What are the best agricultural practices? Not for farmers writ large, but for this
coffee farmer. Yeah,
this farmer on this location with this size farm selling into this market, right? Way more specificity. And that's what you see in the coffee. The lack of understanding here has sort of made a one size fits all when it comes to coffee agriculture, coffee varietals. It's like, what's the new variety that we're going to be able to give coffee farmers? And it's like, no, you miss this entirely. You're going to have a coffee catalog that you're going to be able to figure out what is the best variety for me to grow, given my access to inputs, given how much labor I have access to, given the location of my farm, given the climate that I've been seeing. Yes.
Water access, all of it.
Water access, all of it, right. And that is what the industry doesn't have. And so if you're in sustainability, you will find out about teaching thousands of farmers good agricultural practices. It's very expensive. It's a big project. But one thing that you won't find out much about right now is the role that agronomic research and development plays in all of this. And it is absolutely vital and key and the foundation of it. And so much so that it's like, hey, there are first things first that you have to do here, right? You know, you can teach thousands and thousands of farmers good agricultural practices, but if you taught them in the context of this sort of data-rich environment, now you have a completely different outcome, and it's significantly leveraged.
If we're able to start with a varietal that we know is going to thrive in their environment,
that's it. Wow,
it's a game changer for most farms.
That's right. Exactly.
I have to assume that given it's new what we're doing, what you guys are doing. It's new approach to agriculture.
New to coffee.
That's what I'm saying.
New to agriculture.
No, right. New to coffee agriculture, right? I gotta assume that there are a bunch of big business that are coming at you guys saying and throwing money at you saying, we want first dibs when you figure this out.
No.
That's awesome.
No. Yeah, it's not happening.
Extraordinary.
It's not and it's not awesome. It's not happening, and it's not awesome. No, because the reason it's not happening, okay, is because in wheat, for instance, or maize, there's a thing called a seed sector.
Okay.
It's a whole realm of businesses that do nothing but supply farmers with the seed they need and the plant material. So that's their business.
Yep.
Okay. In coffee, there isn't a seed sector.
Wow.
Yeah.
Where do they get their seeds from then?
From the guy down the road.
No.
They get it from their own plantations. They pull seed, they run nurseries, and they develop their own plantlets. Okay. Now there are nurseries and there are professional run nurseries.
But
no
that's
question about it.
Right?
But it's not how the majority of the industry gets their plant material. So the big companies that could take a new variety or a new seed and make money with it, well, guess what? There's no market for them to sell that to. So that's why Monsanto is not in the coffee game.
Right.
Because there is no seed sector.
Well, they were the company that came to mind. Well, it's Bayer now, isn't it? It's not Monsanto anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, they lost their first court case for $489 million.
Did they now?
Last year, I think it was third quarter. A janitor, I believe, in California.
Wow.
Sued them. He got cancer. He sued them.
Oh, that was for the Roundup.
Yes, for Roundup. He was able to prove that Roundup is what caused his cancer.
Yes.
And he won a court case for $489 million against Monsanto. And sure as shit, within a few minutes after that court case had been announced, Bayer had bought Monsanto.
There you go. Yeah.
I hope that we're not going to get into that, right?
Yeah. Well, it's hard to say where it's going to go, but this is actually sort of that fourth leg of WCR's work right now is around nursery development and plant verification, because this is actually a big problem. On the one hand, people talk to me and they're concerned when I begin to say that, hey, an F1 hybrid, you can't take the seed from an F1 hybrid and make your own plants.
Why not?
Because they segregate.
Okay.
Right? You get 1,000 different plants and none of them have the characteristics of that F1. Yep. So that's a trigger for people because they think, oh, Monsanto selling sterile seeds and the farmer is now dependent on somebody for their plant material. So
sensitive to that in our industry as well.
Right. But it's a completely different situation, and the concern is completely misplaced, that actually, because farmers are being forced to create their own plant material, it's lousy. Okay. Not only
because of the lack of variability,
because they are taking the skills required to produce seed and to produce viable plants for planting are very different than growing coffee. And though many plantations have developed that skill set because they've needed to in order to keep their renovation going with their own farm, It's actually a big problem that what we see at WCR is, for instance, we run a service, and anybody who has a variety of coffee plant that they want identified, they can put that in an envelope, send it to WCR, and for like $100, we will do a DNA fingerprint on that leaf and tell you what variety it is. Wow. And what we're seeing is that half the time the farmer has misidentified the variety.
Half the time.
Half the time, right?
Wow.
Now then you got the other half, and half of those, what you're seeing is that it may be the farmer says, no, this is a Bourbon, or this is a Pacamara, this is Caturra. And we can say, yes, it is Bourbon-like. Yes, it is Caturra-like, but it's not a pure example. There's other genetics have gotten in there somehow, right? Through crossing on
whatever,
on whatever.
Pollinating and all of that.
So what that means is that if I think I have Bourbon, and I know Bourbon grows in a certain way and provides a certain cup quality, but my plant isn't really completely Bourbon, it's a bad example of that, well, I'm not going to get the results.
Especially if someone who's cupping it is expecting a certain flavor profile from it.
That's
and if their expectations were managed to be whatever it actually is, they may actually score it higher.
That's right. So this idea of developing a seed sector and having nursery development,
so important.
What WCR has done is we've created this program called WCR Verified. And it's a process that a nursery can go through to become certified to sell certified seed to the market. So it's a set of protocols for how to treat the plantlets so that they have the highest survivability once they're in the ground, right? And it's random DNA verification of the plant material itself. Okay, these two things together make the WCR Verified program. And so the other piece is that we've developed that program last year, and now what we're moving into is nursery development. Okay, this is a whole new economic opportunity in the coffee land. So this is fantastic news.
It's where I'd be putting my money if I had money to invest. Exactly.
And one of the things that I didn't talk about that I'll touch on here is that we talked about the problem with an F1 was in the propagation, right? And that you had to do the cloning, the somatic embryogenesis, in order to propagate an F1 hybrid. So the problem with that is that it's expensive. In 2014, it used to cost us about $1 a piece to make a plantlet.
Yep.
So think of $1 per seed.
Yep,
that's prohibitive. We've got that down now to about 20 cents per plantlet. Okay, so we're doing things better, faster, cheaper. That's happening, and that will continue to happen. I wouldn't be surprised if the cost goes halves again in 2 or 3 years, okay? But it's still prohibitive. When you talk about a seed cost 0.004 cents per seed versus 10 cents.
Yes.
Okay, it's still
You're talking thousands and thousands
and thousands of plants into communities that don't have financing available, that don't have, right? So right now, the well-financed plantations are doing F1 hybrids because they've got the money. They know even at 20 cents, this thing pencils out because these plants are
huge yield. Yeah.
Yield, right? And good quality and disease reduction. Okay. But we had to figure out a way to distribute these more economically. And this is where this beautiful thing happened. And it's called male sterility.
I'm just not going to even respond to that.
Don't go there, right? So male sterility in this case is a very good thing.
Woohoo!
Woohoo!
I could give you some names, but I won't.
You've got coffee plants shooting blanks. And so what that looks like is you got a coffee plant that produces lots of flower, but there's no cherry. And there's no cherry because the plant isn't producing any pollen.
Wow.
Okay, and this was a natural mutation that was discovered at the Cartier collection. It was a random mutation, and it happens in the plant world. okay,
Okay.
from time to time. So then what we did is we said, okay, well, let's take this male sterile plant over here and let's cross it with Marciesa over here, which is a sarcomore or a catamore, one of those. It's got some disease resistance and some pretty good cupping quality. Let's see what happens when we put those two together. And it cupped very well and it produced very well. And because the plants themselves are male sterile, you have then the opportunity to produce in mass F1 seed. And the reason that you can do this is because here's typically how it works for a breeder, right? First you have to collect pollen from the male plant. So you're picking unopened coffee flowers, opening them, and pulling out pollen.
The pollen.
So we have technicians that are doing that. Then you put that pollen in a test tube. Then you go to the female plant, or the male that you're going to, the plant you're going to fertilize, and you have to remove all its pollen. So you remove the stamens, and actually you can do that if you go to Origin and you see an open coffee flower. If you sort of close the petals and this pull them, all the stamens come off and all the pollen comes off, nice and clean. So now you just have the plant ovary. You have the pistil, okay? So you take the test tube pollen on a paintbrush, paint it on the pistil of the female plant, put a paper bag over the whole thing to prevent other pollen from getting in there, and then once the seed begins to produce, you take the paper bag off, and there you have on that branch F1 hybrid seed. So obviously doing that in mass is economically
prohibitive. It's not going to happen.
But if the entire plant doesn't make its own pollen, so then what you can do is plant a whole row of the male sterile plant a whole row of the Marciesa, and everything that grows on the male sterile plant is an F1 seed now.
Yeah, wow.
And so that's what they're doing with Star Maya. That is Star Maya. It's an F1 hybrid that is distributed by seed, and this is the game changer. Okay, that one factor means we're going to be able to get that F1 technology, that F1 plant material down to producers regardless of their
economic situation.
That's right.
That's outstanding.
It's fantastic. It's a whole new, like, I was thinking of the same thing you, like, I want to start some of these F1 factories, right? You really only need to get these original F1, the male sterile clones. You've got to create your seed production by buying those, right? Okay, so those are 20 cents a piece, right? And you put those in the ground, then you get your plant that you're crossing it with, whatever that is. And if you want to make Star Maya, you cross it with Marciesa. And then boom, you've just got this F1 seed factory. Okay, wherever you want it.
You could do it in a factory.
You could do it
in a warehouse.
You could do it in a warehouse.
Vertical farming.
You could do that. Absolutely. You can do it at Origin. Now, you probably want to do it at Origin because when you're trying to bring seed in,
it becomes prohibitive with regards to customs and quarantines and things like that.
So, but literally, they are figuring out right now. They're pollinating these male sterile plants with like a branch of the Marciesa. They'll like cut a branch off of the Marciesa plant that's got all kinds of pollen on it, and just go and whack the male sterile plant with it, right? And they're learning how many plants can I fertilize? With one sample, right?
Wow.
You know, and so the yields go down after about like the fourth one. You need a new branch, you know, and so this is the kind of thing that they're learning right now about how to do this. But what we've done is that we now have identified the chromosome that F1 sterility, the genes for F1 sterility are located. And what this means is we are actually going to be able to produce a bunch of male sterile mother plants.
Yeah, wow.
Okay, so what that tells me is we've got a lot of F1s that are sort of in the ground right now that can go in the ground via somatic embryogenesis and cloning, which is a little expensive. But when I look down to the future, I see actually no F1s are going to be produced by somatic embryogenesis, because this new way of doing it is so much better, faster, and cheaper.
And so old school.
And so old school.
I mean, they could do it at origin, no problem. They don't need a lab to do it. How exciting.
Problem. Right. It is very exciting. It's very exciting. And so back to your earlier question about somebody who is in this industry and they're looking about their own career or whatever, this sustainability piece, and knowing what all the tools are available to a coffee producer for sustainability is key. And then also understanding, say, the risks of your current sustainability program. Sustainability programs are largely run using a concept called a theory of change.
Okay.
Okay, so a theory of change, and this happens in the nonprofit world. A theory of change is you say, our theory of change is that if we teach farmers how to cover crop, fertilize, and prune, that they will produce more coffee and better coffee, resulting in more income.
Okay.
That is a theory of change.
Okay.
It doesn't mean that if you teach a farmer to do this,
it's actually going to happen.
Actually going to happen.
It's the theory of it.
Right. So you have to take a look at all of these sustainability strategies and evaluate them upon their theory of change and what can go wrong in there. What level of risk do I have? So let's say we're teaching 60,000 farmers new farming techniques. Well, one risk is that they don't implement those techniques.
Okay.
Right? They go to the classes, they learn how to do it, they go back to their farms and they say, yeah,
I'm just going to keep doing it the way that I've always done it.
Yeah, no, that's too much trouble.
And there's a generational thing there too, right? Like you may get the second generation or third generation of coffee farmers that are currently in their 20s that are thinking, should I go away and study medicine or do whatever, go to university in the cities? Or is there actually a viable future for me on this coffee farm? They see these practices that their parents perhaps didn't want to embrace, and they could go ahead and I mean, they're more open to change shifts in technology, right?
That's what we're seeing for sure. The
That's so exciting.
Is so excited to be like what you can. I mean, the farmers fundamentally understand this seed produces better than my old seed.
Yes.
Right. They get that, and so they're very excited to have a plant that could perform significantly better.
But all this labs nonsense that could get quite intimidating for some.
Exactly. So back to being that sustainability director or having sustainability as part of your portfolio of control within your career, it's being able to then evaluate really what are the chances that we're going to be able to move the needle on coffee sustainability using this strategy or that strategy. Right. And coffee, people that are in coffee sustainability, I actually did this talk in at World Coffee Leaders Forum in Seoul, Korea last year, where it was really how to evaluate your sustainability portfolio and to understand when you have achieved balance, because you need everything going. You don't do all good agricultural practices, but don't invest in R&D up front.
Right.
Right. You don't do all R&D up front, but don't do
marketing.
Nothing to help the farmer today. Right. So it's about finding that right balance and being able to bring that to the table. And I can tell you that the people I talk to are the sustainability people. And by and large, this level of sophistication does not exist in their understanding of their programs.
What kinds of degrees do people need? To like what are there sustainability degrees? I'm sorry for my ignorance there, but are there special things that people have studied?
I think it helps to have agronomy.
Okay.
To just know the basics of agronomic science and research. You don't have to be like a maize breeder or anything like that, but knowing that it exists, knowing how it exists in other commodities like hazelnuts or strawberries or avocados or whatever, how is agronomic research and development coming out there? What are the kinds of tools that are available? And then the other piece is that realizing that we mentioned 3 countries that have ag R&D happening right now, and you're seeing that, boy, one of the results of that is that those farmers are producing a lot of coffee, and in several cases are making profit with that coffee. So what WCR is doing is actually coming into the other end and looking at the entire other part of the coffee producing world that doesn't have any ag R&D, and we are bringing ag R&D to them, right? And the final note here about WCR is that it's not WCR being sort of the great white savior coming in from the developed country, and we're gonna save you all with these technologies that you're not able to have your own. That is not the strategy. The strategy is to actually build ag R&D capacity at origin. So for this reason, the International Multi-Location Variety Trial, we have partnered with the National Coffee Institutes of 28 different countries. Okay.
That's amazing.
And these countries are like, I mean, that is amazing. Getting anybody
to get that reach,
cooperate, and so that was huge. But these coffee institutes, I mean, a lot of times it's like a guy in an office with a beat up filing cabinet and a motorcycle that's broken down. Like, that's the extent of the support that the state is giving their coffee farmers. And so what we're doing is we're developing these things called breeding hubs, for instance, and we've got one up and running in Rwanda right now. And what that is that we come in and we bring all of these the plant material to make crosses with, and then local agronomists and breeders come to the breeding hub and they bring their locally adapted varieties, and we give them the shortcuts to if you're going for this characteristic, you can cross with this one. If you're going for that characteristic, you can cross with this one. So literally what we're doing is we're helping Rwanda right now develop their own locally adapted varieties. Okay.
That's outstanding.
The first down payment is these first 75 that we're doing, and we did them because the industry needs them yesterday.
Yep.
So we needed to have these things off and running. But as you look into the future, the future is that each one of these coffee growing regions are going to be developing their own varieties based on bringing in genetic diversity from the Ethiopian land races, and bringing in disease resistance from the Robusta plant via the Timor hybrid.
Yep.
Didn't talk a lot about that. And then their own locally adapted varieties that are already doing well, that the farmers like, but it's taking their varieties and genetically improving it, right, by bringing in some other
some variety
into it. So the idea that coffee is going to disappear, there's not going to be enough coffee and all that kind of stuff, is really nonsense.
If you didn't exist, it wouldn't be nonsense.
No.
If the work being done, you know what I'm saying?
It would become more of a luxury item.
Right.
Coffee would still exist.
It would still exist, but it would be more expensive. It would be something that was, because demand would be pushed up and supply was going to decrease. And what it sounds like is you are reinvigorating the hope in a very real scientific way for the future, that we're going to replenish not only the supplies of coffee, but we're also going to give farmers more options, even in spite of climate change, that they may be able to continue to thrive in an industry, which is just remarkable.
That's exactly right. And
thank you.
Yeah, no, and I thank all these PhDs, these molecular biologists, Lucille, and we've got such a great team of people doing this work.
It's wonderful.
I have never worked with such a fantastic group of smart people, and
I want to get some of them on the podcast. I want to speak to some coffee scientists. Yeah, that would be really wonderful.
Absolutely, we can do that. And
thank you, Greg, for your time. I really appreciate it. We did go a little over. I'm sorry.
It's all right.
We could probably talk for another 3 hours on this this stuff.
I'm getting that sense. Yeah. Your long form podcast.
I'm sorry. I looked at the time and I thought, no, we've got to try and end it because I want to be respectful of your time. And then we just kept going. But I really appreciate your time. I had a fantastic conversation and really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Okay, and we can do another one. So
I can't wait.
We can zero in on another topic and
perfect
and focus in on something specific. And maybe that's where I can bring in actually one of the other coffee scientists.
That would be great.
Running the global coffee monitoring program or something like that.
Yeah, we've got to disseminate this information in a way where it's not just on a website where people have to go to it and be intentional about consuming it. I really want to make sure that, you know, the people who going to be driving in their cars get to listen to this and get, you know, their interest piqued about, oh, so there's actually someone out there that, or an organization out there that's going to guarantee that I've got a job in 20 years.
There you go.
You know, so thank you again for everything you guys are doing.
You're welcome.
And for your time in particular.
You're welcome.
You have a great day, Greg. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
See you later. Bye.